to our national lead. They fled the United States seeking freedom and safety, but instead found pain and despair, forced into child slave labor. That has been the terrible reality for some of the tens of thousands of children who enter the U.S. illegally and alone every year. In 2014, several children ended up working and living in these deplorable conditions in a slave labor ring in Ohio. And now a 6-month Senate investigation, bipartisan, says the federal government delivered the minors into the hands of their captors. You heard that right. The federal government delivered them there. The investigation also found that the government does little to prevent other children from being exploited in the same way. Ohio Senator Rob Portman, he headed the investigation. He joins us now. Senator, I imagine people at home are just trying to figure out how this could have happened. In the simplest terms, how did the U.S. help or allow these children to end up as slave laborers?
Yeah, people are outraged. You know, they opened up their morning paper about 7 months ago in Ohio and saw that a U.S. government agency had actually placed kids with traffickers and criminals. And Senator Claire McCaskill, Democrat, and myself took on this investigation. It is bipartisan. It's also outrageous that this is happening. And frankly, Health and Human Services and the Office of Refugee Resettlement have not taken the steps necessary to address this so that it doesn't continue to happen.
Now the initial numbers we see are 6 to 8, single digits, but we also are told that they don't know for sure how many. I mean,
yeah,
can you estimate how many children?
Well, unfortunately, it's a lot more than 6 to 8. Yeah. It's 6 to 8 who were part of a case that was brought and indictments that were actually done by our U.S. attorney in Northern Ohio. But no, there's a lot more than that. And unfortunately, HHS
so we're talking hundreds?
I think so, yeah. They don't have good numbers for this. There's also instances, as you know, not just of child labor, but also of sexual abuse and other cases, because they aren't doing the right screening to know where these kids are going. They're sending these kids not to their parents, not to family members, but to people who say they're friends of the family, but they don't check that. And they aren't checking the homes before they go there, as you would in any other child placement like foster care. And then they're not doing the follow-up visit. So it's just the basics that they aren't doing. And as a result, you have these tragic circumstances, as was what happened in Marion, Ohio. These kids were working 12 hours a day, 6, 7 days a week. Their paychecks were going to the traffickers, so they weren't even getting paid for this, this kind of terrible work conditions. And you just saw the photograph of the trailer where they were living. They were living with multiple adults, mattresses even underneath the trailer for some of the kids. So deplorable living conditions. And this just can't happen in Ohio in the 21st century.
And they must have just felt so helpless. I mean, they're illegals here, so it's not like they can go down to the authorities and say, say help me out.
According to the indictment, they were threatened, their families were threatened by these traffickers, and so they were living in fear.
Now, this caught my eye that as part of your investigation, you found that HHS, Department of Health and Human Services, that they knew they had a problem, and even when they were alerted to the evidence, they didn't act immediately to stop. Is that right?
Yeah, well, they still haven't in a sense. And we had testimony today from HHS still not taking responsibility for this. Frankly, they were overwhelmed with some of the surge of kids coming in. They had the funding to do it, by the way. They actually gave back about 20 to 25% of their funding. They weren't using it all. But they did not put the systems in place to keep this from happening. Again, just the basic checks on who these people were, who they were giving these kids to, how the kids were doing, make sure they didn't have criminal histories, and if they did, to ban them from going there. Until this week, Jim, there was no criminal record that was bad enough to automatically say you're not going to send that kid there. So you could be sending these kids to, child molesters, rapists, murderers, for that matter. Finally, this week, they did say, well, yeah, there's some crimes that are so bad that we're not going to send those kids to those people.
To say the least. I have to ask, what happens next for these kids? So you find out about them, you get them out of there. Do they stay in the U.S.? Do they have to go back? They came in illegally. Are they deported?
These are kids who came in illegally, unaccompanied minors. The idea is you put them into this HHS detention facility, a shelter, and then you find them someplace to go, a home, while their cases are pending, while their immigration case is pending. What's happened, unfortunately, is that, again, they have a lot of kids coming in. They aren't being careful as to who these kids go to. And frankly, a bunch of the kids are not showing up at their hearings. And part of the problem is they're sending some of these kids actually to illegals themselves who don't want to show up at a hearing. So the whole system needs to be looked at.
Oh, goodness. Well, you feel for them. Thanks for looking into it.
You betcha.
We appreciate your service, Senator Rob.